Hey guys, welcome back to Keys of the Cosmos. This is video number 4 in my series Astrophotography Target Tips. And this is a special one. I know I always say I'm excited about it, and I'm always excited because I love imaging and I love astrophotography. But this one's really is special because in the first 3 I've sort of focused on this type of thing. They're beautiful, emission nebula, big, bright, fairly easy to image. But this video we're talking about something a lot more challenging. This is a target that includes reflection nebula, emission nebula, a star cluster, a bright star, a dark nebula, brown gas, all in one image. So as you can imagine, not only is it really unique and beautiful, but it's pretty challenging as well, particularly on the processing side. So we'll talk about that in that part of the video. But I just sort of wanted to give you my experience in imaging Rho Ophiuchi. Now you maybe never heard of it before, or maybe you've seen it but didn't know the name, but definitely if you've seen it, it's one of those targets that sticks in your mind because it's quite unique and just beautiful. I'm going to call it Rho for the rest of the video just because it's a long name and I'm sure I'm butchering the pronunciation anyway. But Rho is one of those targets, once you see it, you almost don't believe it's real. It looks like I always think it looks like someone took paint and threw it in the sky and it sort of stayed suspended there. It's full of beautiful color, blue, yellowy orange, red, as I mentioned, a star cluster, dark gas. I remember the first time I saw it, I was just blown away. And I thought to myself, I have to image this whenever I'm able to. Now, it's definitely not for beginners. I mean, not that I'm an expert in any way, and I'll be the first to admit, even on the processing side, this was probably above my current capabilities to really do it justice, but I did my best, and I think you'll find the end result at the end of this video was decent. I'm happy with it. There's definitely room for improvement though. But if you've never imaged, if you've never imaged and processed star cluster or reflection nebula, I would, maybe stay away from this one until you've had some practice with that, because that's really what makes it a challenge. Doing all of these things at once and trying to make all aspects of it look nice. But there's also, on top of that, a lot of other challenging things when it comes to this target. And we'll sort of bring that into our first point of location, where to locate this particular target. Now, it's located in the constellation Scorpius, as far as where you'll actually find it and where you'll be imaging. The main star is Antares. Now, Antares is big and bright. It's an orange star. You can see it in just about any skies. And what you want to look for is that star and then the 3 stars above it. I always think of it sort of looks, here's a picture of it here, but to me it sort of resembles a fan where Antares is the base and it sort of opens up to those 3 stars. We're imaging, in this particular case, a good chunk of the sky. So this is definitely the biggest, most wide field image I've ever done. And it depends what you're going to use to image it, whether or not those 3 stars above Antares will actually be in the image. In my case, they weren't. Because that really is a big, if you look at it with your own eyes in this night sky, it's a big chunk of the sky for sure. But we'll talk about that in a second. But let's talk about location and also why this is tricky. So you'll notice that Antares, and just the constellation Scorpius in general, especially here in Toronto at 43 degrees latitude, stays very low in the sky. So it's in the southern sky and it never goes above 20 degrees. So that's really low. In fact, normally for emission nebula, even with a narrowband filter, I don't shoot anything below 25 degrees. I've always talked before in the past, when it comes to images, it's better to have good data, higher in the sky, a nice color background, than just shooting as long as you can and including, an object at 10, 15, maybe even 20 degrees, and same thing as it sets. I'd always rather just capture it in its prime spot and use that data, even if it means using less in the end, because good data always makes a better picture. So that's the challenge with Rho. It stays very low in the sky, and also here in Toronto, the southern sky, at least where I am, is pretty bad. It's has a lot of sky glow, and adding in that it stays that low, it never really gets out of that sky glow. So for this particular target, I'm going to say you have to get to darker skies. You can't image this in a Bordeaux 8, Bordeaux 9. I mean, I'm not going to say you can't image it, but to get the best results, in my opinion, you have to get to darker skies. This is one of those targets where you can't just on a whim go out and shoot it. You got to plan it properly. You got to visit the site, where you're going to be imaging. Make sure there's no obstructions. Make sure there's no moon that night. There's a lot of factors that go into it because of the location in particular. Now, in saying that, there's a lot of other challenges, which we'll talk about later, but the location is easy to find, easy to frame it up and all that, but hard to get really good conditions if you don't live in the middle of nowhere, like I don't. So definitely locating it's easy, but being able to find suitable conditions might be a challenge and something you're going to have to put a lot of thought into. So let's talk about framing it up. So we've located in the southern sky. We can easily see Antares. Now, Antares is sort of the key. Now, it depends what you're going to be shooting with when it comes to framing it up. Now, I shot this particular target with my Ascar FMA 180. I talked about this in my last video. This is my newest little telescope. It's 180 millimeter focal length. And in fact, Rho was one of the images I had in my mind when I thought about buying this. This Rho and also the Spaghetti Nebula. Another really big emission nebula that would be hard to fit with the Red Cat. So that's one reason I wanted this. I thought it would be perfect. I wanted to do sort of a more cropped version of Rho. Now, a lot of the images you'll see, guys, girls, they're using 135 millimeter camera lens, which is quite a bit more wide field than this. And so they're sort of capturing the whole cloud complex and a lot of that dark gas and the stars around it. I wanted to do more of a cropped version, just focusing on the three main clouds. The red, the blue, and the orange, yellow, whatever you want to call it, and some of that dark gas in the center. That's sort of what I envisioned, and that's why I used this particular telescope. So I can only speak to framing it up with this telescope. Obviously, it's going to be a lot easier with more wide field, camera lens, because you have a lot more room to crop around and sort of get it centered how you want. But with mine, it actually filled up a lot of the frame, a lot of the the frame with this telescope. So I had to be quite careful of how I framed it up, and also we'll talk about lining it up on a multi-night imaging session, which is what I did in this case. I had 2 nights that I imaged this over, so how to get it sort of lined up properly between the 2 nights. So when it comes to framing, what I did in my particular case with this Ascar is I use Antares, and if you take a test image of even just 20-30 seconds, you'll see the star cluster beside it, above it, depending on the position on your camera. That'll pop out right away. It's actually referred to as M4, that star cluster. But it's super bright. You can't see with your naked eye in my terrible skies, but you'll see it right away with a test exposure. So I use those 2 things to sort of frame it up. Now in my case, the way it was positioned, the angle of my camera, here's a single exposure, you'll see I kept Antares and that star cluster above it to the right. And I knew that everything else in the image, just by using Stellarium and researching it, was to the left. So if I got Antares, just off from the right, you'll see it's not super close, but it is towards the right side, I'd be able to fit everything else in and get it nice and centered. So that's what I did. Now, when it came to imaging over multiple nights, as I always mention, I try to use surrounding stars. I take a picture of the back of my DSLR, or I make sure I save one of my single exposures and send it to my phone, so that the next night I can use surrounding stars to help position it just perfectly, so I don't get a lot of crazy stacking lines when I go to stack it up and then before I process. So what I do is, you see these 2 stars on this image here. These are the 2 stars I used. I sort of took a picture, I made a mental note, compared it that second night. I pulled out my phone, checked that exposure, and tried to line them up roughly the same. And you'll see in my stacked image, it worked. I didn't have any crazy stacking lines. Everything was very centered and in the same position from the first night to the second night. So it definitely worked. And if you're shooting a little bit more cropped in like I am, you're going to want to make sure you do that, because you don't have a ton of room if you want to include all 3 clouds, the dark gas around it, the brown gas, and of course the star cluster. So just a little tip for getting everything in and getting it lined up over multiple nights. As I mentioned, you don't have a ton of time each night, at least if you're shooting somewhere like here in Toronto. So you're probably going to have to do multiple nights, unless you're able to get out somewhere like a really dark sky site. This kind of moves us into integration time when we're talking about how much you should do. And it depends. I've seen images of Rho that were only 1 hour. 1 hour of imaging is not a lot, and they were taken from Bortle 2 or Bortle 1, which is obviously amazing sky conditions, and they looked fantastic, way better than mine. Beautiful color, not a lot of noise. Now they were shooting at really wide field, which is a lot more forgiving, like when you're using a camera lens. But even still, they looked astonishing. Beautiful colors and just amazing. Realistically, if you're shooting from Bortle 5, like I was this time around, 5 or 6, I think you're going to need to sink a little more time. Now, in my particular image, I had 3.5 hours of integration time. Here's my stacked image. You'll see it's definitely a lot brighter than I normally do. It's a little bit of a brown tone, but another reason why it's so bright is because there's two things actually. I shot with 2 minutes exposures, which is the first time I've ever done that, and I shot at ISO 3200, which is the highest I've ever done. A couple reasons for that. We're in Bortle 5 now, so it's darker skies. You're able to get away with a higher ISO. I found that the ISO 3200 looked a lot better than my usual 1600, even though I was not using a narrowband filter. I don't know if we talked about that yet, but in this particular case, you can't use a narrowband filter. Because we're dealing with so many different things, we're dealing with reflection nebula and this brown gas and all that, if you use a narrowband filter, you're not going to get those beautiful colors from those sections of the image to come out. It's going to block it out, and you're not going to get the same quality. That's why I say, in my opinion, you really can't shoot this from really light polluted skies. It just won't work. You can't throw that narrowband filter on like you would with something like this and just shoot anyway and not have to worry about it. When you're using, like I was, a light suppression filter, like my Skytech CLS CCD, it's not going to block out sky glow. It's not going to block out moonlight, not nearly as effectively. So you can't just throw that in and think that you can just start imaging and you'll be able to process it out. It will allow in the reflection nebula colors, like the blue you'll see in the final image in this video, but it's also going to allow in a lot of that other stuff. And that's why I say if you don't have really good sky conditions, you're going to struggle. So in my case, I shot with the Skytech CLS CCD, ISO 3200 and 2 minute subs. And it was really nice. It's the first time I've ever done 2 minute subs, but because of the lightweight of this particular telescope compared to even like the Red Cat, the star tracker didn't have any problems tracking the night sky. It was able to easily do it, and I still had nice round stars after 2 minutes. And by doing 2 minutes, you're allowing more light in, and you're able to bring out more detail. It's always better to shoot longer. As I've mentioned before, I'm limited to 1 minute with my Sharp Star because of the weight. But when you put a nice light telescope like this on, you're able to do longer exposures. So I did 2 minute exposures. And that's why you see that stacked image, it's a lot more light to it. It's a lot brighter than it normally is. It's not that dark black, with just a few stars showing, and then we have to pull it out in processing. There's still a lot to pull out in this picture, obviously, but it's a lot brighter than you typically see. So integration time, I would say, like I said, if you're in Bortle 5 or so, 6, you're going to need to sink at least, I would say, 3 hours into it. Obviously the more the better, but realistically at least 3. If you're in really dark skies, you could probably get away with between 1 and 2 hours if you're limited with time, and you'll probably still get a very beautiful picture out of it. So that's what I'd say about integration time. But yeah, 2 minute subs, and this particular one was 3.5 hours. Now, I just want to mention quickly, I actually had 4 hours of data, but I want to show something really quickly here. Here's 2 pictures. Here's 2 exposures just taken within 20 minutes of each other, but you see the difference. One of them is super red and full of light, and that's actually, I believe anyway, it's from traffic in the area. You see, Rho is so low in the sky, and my particular location where I was, it started when it came up right over the road, that the big trucks that would go by were actually lighting up the sky and ruining the images. So what I decided to do is get rid of those and just keep the best data. When it moved up over the road and over the field, I was able to get much cleaner data. It was nice black sky, much darker. And I found when I stacked up 3.5 hours of better data, it did produce a better result. I mean, it wasn't like night and day. I'm not going to pretend like it was drastic, but it was definitely cleaner and definitely a little bit easier to process, and I was happier with it. So, I always go back to better data always makes a better picture, even if it's less. So just something interesting to show you those 2 exposures there. But that's another one that challenges the Rho. It's so low, and if there's anything, even just traffic or the moon or anything like that, it's going to affect your images. So you have to really plan that out. So let's talk about processing. I'll be honest with you, I almost don't even know what to tell you for processing. I tried this one at least 10 times. I've lost track of everything. I tried to make notes, but boy, I tried everything. The biggest challenge is that as I stated before, you're dealing with so many different things in one image. It's hard to try to bring one thing out and not affect the other one in a negative way. So you maybe try to bring out one of the clouds and the color, and then your star cluster gets overexposed or is blown out or loses detail. As I mentioned, I'm not an expert in Photoshop. I'm still learning, of course, we all are, but in particular, I don't know how to create masks and all that. That's a little bit more advanced, which I hope to learn soon. If you're able to do all that stuff where you can sort of mask everything off and just work on one thing and not make it look obvious, you're going to have a lot of more success, and you're really going to, do it justice. But in my case, I just sort of, obviously did my levels adjustment, my curve adjustment to bring it out. The key where the image really popped out was, I've talked about in my last couple of videos, that sampler. When you're in levels adjustment, using that sampler on the image to get the right tone. The tone is important. And you have to decide sort of what you like. Do you want more gas to show, or do you want it to be a little bit more contrasty, and just focus on the clouds, the colorful clouds? I wanted to sort of mix. I think, if I'm being honest, my final image is a bit contrasty. You'll see some images where it's full of brown gas everywhere and dark nebula, and you could tell that's sort of what they wanted to focus on. I wanted to sort of get a balance where I wanted the blue, the red, the yellow, but I also wanted the dark gas to show but not be overwhelming and take up the whole image. And like I said, it's not perfect, but I think my final image is decent. But when it came to processing, that's what I did. I obviously went into camera raw filter and did a lot of adjustments. I really brought the luminance up to sort of soften it. That brown gas looked very grainy because I didn't have a ton of integration time, and it wasn't the best sky conditions possible. So that was definitely a struggle, but I brought that luminance up and sort of softened it out. And then I slowly brought in the structure, the details tabs, and tried to bring those clouds back. So at least they had a little bit of definition. Another thing I'll say too is I never touch the saturation tab. Never. If you guys have watched my other videos, I always go on about a natural looking. Sure, it's pink and it's colorful, but I don't like oversaturated. I don't like to look like a blotch in the sky. In this case, I thought, what, why not? Let's have a little bit more fun with this one, and let's really bring out the color. It's such a unique target. So I actually did adjust the saturation and the vibrance, which was shocking. But I think you'll see it's not overboard. It's definitely, exaggerates maybe the colors a little bit, but hey, we're here to make pretty pictures. This is not, we're not doing science. We want to make what we find, in our opinion anyways, a beautiful picture, and that's what I try to do. So I definitely went a little bit crazier than I normally do with saturation, and tried to bring out that color. It was tricky, as I mentioned. My star cluster isn't great. I'll be the first to admit. If you zoom in on it, it's not great detail. It's really hard to get that star cluster clean. It gets sacrificed. I really kept my eye on it when I was stretching this image, trying not to blow it out. And same with Antares even. It's such a bright star. It's so easy to blow out. So finding that balance is tricky. But, honestly, you're just going to have to play with it. You're probably going to do it multiple times. In one day you'll love it, and the next day you'll hate it. And you'll scrap it and start all over. And that's what I did. I got about, at least 10 pictures on my phone, different versions. But they're all very similar. Slight differences with the, But for me, it was all about the brown gas. There's a lot of brown gas in this image. And that's something you don't get in a lot of, images like this. You do get some dark nebula in these targets, in Cygnus and all that, but this one is unique. I've never personally done a target like this where it had all this brown gas, the dark nebula. So for me, it was just trying to get a balance. I wanted to sort of highlight all of the features and still have it look, quality as a wide field shot, and that's the key. If you start zooming in, you'll see there's definitely sacrifices that I had to make, but overall, I'm happy with it, and I think it turned out quite well. So processing, it's just one of those things. You're going to have to play with it. If you're more advanced with Photoshop and you can create masks and all that, you're going to have probably a lot more success. It's going to take you a lot of time, but if you're like me and you're still learning Photoshop and you don't know all those more advanced techniques, you're going to struggle a little bit, I think. And the reason I say that too is because I've already actually shot my next target I've acquired all the data. I've already started fooling around with processing, and boy, it literally felt like it took 5 minutes compared to Rho. I mean, Rho, I like I said, I tried over and over, and I obsessed over it. This one, which you'll see soon in my next video, it's a beautiful image, beautiful target, I should say. Like colorful and beautiful, but boy, Mission Nebula, you forget just how easy it is compared to some of these other targets, particularly reflection, and never mind an image like Rho where it's got a little bit of everything. So definitely it was a learning experience for me, and I'll probably reprocess it another 5 times. Who knows? We'll see. But I'm looking forward to adding to this. You know, I had, like I said, 3.5 hours, but I'd love to get another 1.5 hours, 2 hours, and see what I can do with it. Get it even cleaner and get some of that contrast and gas to pop out. But anyway, yeah, that's it. You know, as I said, guys, if you've got a little bit of experience, you've imaged a few different things, give it a go. I say, make sure you plan it out. Make sure you got the right sky conditions. Make sure you have the right, you know, the moon's not there, all that stuff. There's not trees blocking because it is so low in the sky. But if you plan it properly, you're gonna no doubt have a lot of success, and you'll be blown away. But this is, to me, one of the most beautiful things in the sky. It's hard to believe it's real. You know, people always say to me, particularly this image, a lot of people said, "Is this real? Like, is this really?" And you know, it really is. We might exaggerate a little bit with that saturation, but these are real colors that are there, and pretty amazing that we're able to image it. So I hope you enjoy my image. As I mentioned, I've already got my next one captured. The data's there. I'm just working on processing it, and we're going to try something different with processing. I want to try a different program, using it with Photoshop to try a different technique and a sort of a new look for this particular target. So look forward to that. I hope maybe you've never done it before, or you've seen images, and I want to show you how you're able to do that. And hopefully I'll be able to make a video as well on how to do it using this program. For a sort of a different look. It's nice to change it up from time to time, and there's certain images we'll talk about in the next video that sort of suit this style more than others, and I think this one does. So I'm looking forward to it, making that video and sharing it with you guys, and I hope you enjoy it. So thanks, guys. As always, I appreciate your support, and make sure you subscribe if you haven't already. Lots more to come this summer that I look forward to sharing with you. And here's my image of Rho Ophiuchi. Enjoy. Thanks, guys. See you on the next one.